A mother of two had plans to walk away from her marriage. However, she never got a chance when a push by her husband proved fatal. The case happened nearly 8 years ago, but for the family and loved ones of Cynthia Bates, they are just now getting justice. So what happened? Let's go to Dallas, Georgia in May of 2017. That's when 28-year-old Cindy seemingly had enough of her marriage to Jonathan Bates. According to local station WSB-TV in Georgia, Cindy told her husband she wanted a divorce. Then what happened next would leave 2 young children to grow up without their mom. Jonathan told police he pushed Cindy, which caused her to fall, and she hit her head. The whole incident even happened in front of their children, who were just 4 and 7 years old when it happened. The young children, seemingly terrified, ran to a neighbor's home after witnessing the push and fall. According to court documents, Cindy was later declared brain dead and died at a hospital. But was it an accident? Well, police say Cindy previously accused her husband of domestic violence. An autopsy showed she died of blunt force trauma to the back of her head. So Jonathan was arrested and charged with her murder, as well as battery and 2 counts of cruelty to children. Seems pretty open and shut, right? It was until a Paulding County judge threw out the murder charge. Chief Judge Tony Beaver said he didn't see enough evidence to find probable cause for murder and cruelty to children. So Jonathan was held for a misdemeanor simple battery charge and an unrelated probation violation. At the time when those charges were dropped, he could walk out after posting a $1,500 bail, but a grand jury didn't see it that way. They later reinstated Jonathan's charges on the murder and child cruelty charges, and he posted a $16,500 bond. As for Judge Beavers, he recused himself from the case in 2022, so it was time for Jonathan to face a new judge. Problem is, before he could, he fled and went on the run. He skipped an October 22 court hearing, and then he was on the run for nearly 2 years, but was finally caught by authorities in April of last year. Authorities say he was found still living in the metro Atlanta area. Jonathan was ultimately convicted of his wife's murder, as well as manslaughter, 2 counts of aggravated assault, and 2 counts of cruelty to children. He was sentenced this month to life in prison. His lengthy sentence finally bringing justice to Cindy's family and loved ones nearly 8 years after her tragic death. Joining me now is attorney Melba Pearson. Melba, thank you so much for being here. You know, this case happened nearly 8 years ago, and so much has happened in between. A judge last week sentenced Jonathan Bates to life in prison, but I want to ask you, what's your thoughts overall about this case?
So this was definitely a very, very bizarre case and very tragic, especially from the standpoint that the victim was taken from her family, from her loved ones, and her children had to witness this. And so life, I think, is absolutely the appropriate sentence in this case because those children are going to have trauma that they will be dealing with for the rest of their lives. And obviously, they're never going to be able to get their mother back. So the amount of therapy they're going to need, counseling, there may be behavioral issues moving forward, because all of those things, when you witness such a violent crime, especially by someone you love and trust, it causes a lot of confusion, and oftentimes it causes kids to act out. So, you know, this is just a tragedy all around, and just another reminder in terms of domestic violence and the dangers involved with domestic violence, intimate partner violence relationships.
And it seems like this case might have come to a resolution a lot sooner, but that is until Jonathan Bates fled and went on the run for nearly 18 months. What is your reaction? Are you surprised that he managed to stay on the run for 18 months? And from what we know, it's not like he fled the country or anything like that, or even the state, really. He was still in the metro Atlanta area, still in Georgia. But are you surprised he managed to stay hidden in a way from law enforcement for that amount of time?
I am a bit surprised that he was able to hide locally for so long, because again, you would think that law enforcement would be looking at where his friends are, potential maybe girlfriends or whatever the case may be, siblings, anything like that. They'd be starting with those people to search their homes or find out if there's been any contact. So it is a little surprising, but the reality is, I think a lot of people have the impression that when people try to flee to escape justice, they, get on a plane and go to Bali, right? Well, yeah, those are the ones we don't catch, right? But the average person who ends up finding themselves in a criminal situation often doesn't have the means to go deep underground and relocate to a different country or something along those lines. So they stay where it's familiar. They stay where they have resources, where they know people, where they know the area. And so they're not standing out because, you're in a new community with a map trying to figure out which way to go. This is someplace that you know, and you can duck down a back street if you see law enforcement coming or things like that. So it made sense that he stayed in that area. It was just kind of perturbing that law enforcement wasn't able to find him sooner when he was unfortunately basically hiding under their noses.
And it seems like there's so many added layers to this case. Seemingly how he stayed and got on the run in the first place, I should say, is that, the judge dropped the murder charge against him until the grand jury later reinstated that charge. But I want to ask you, what do you make of the judge saying there's not enough probable cause in that case for a murder? What do you kind of make of that ruling where the judge did wipe away that murder charge initially until that grand jury reinstated it?
Well, based on what I've learned in terms of researching this case, there was a connection between the judge and the defendant or the defendant's family. And that was something that was later revealed after that charge was dismissed. And then the judge had to recuse himself or basically remove himself from the case, which he should have done beforehand. Because again, from an ethical perspective, if you are a judge and you realize that you know one of the parties or you have some connection to the case, you remove yourself from the case and have another judge be assigned. So that way there's no appearance of impropriety. Even if you're ruling in the most fair and just way ever, there's always that appearance of, but did you rule this way because you have an interest in the outcome? So this judge should have recused himself earlier. I'd be curious to know if there's any disciplinary action that's going to result from that, because again, that could be the basis of an ethics complaint, and that could be a way to end up basically losing your job as a judge. So we'll see what happens from that perspective. But clearly, there was more than enough evidence to sustain a murder charge, and the grand jury came to the same conclusion. So clearly, there was some bias there in terms of why the judge did what he did.
And Jonathan Bates' attorneys, they've argued this was an accident. What are your thoughts on that argument, given that he admitted to pushing her, she fell, hit her head, but then, of course, some could argue if it was really an accident, why did he run in the first place?
Exactly the main question. If this was truly an accident, why didn't you go get help immediately? Why didn't you call paramedics? Why didn't you call a friend, someone to come help and give assistance? The fact that you didn't do that, and the fact that you basically left your partner there to die, and then you basically at some point go on the run, that to me speaks volumes of the mind state of this defendant as well as his guilt.
And, kind of going back to what we had talked about earlier in this discussion, one thing that always sticks out to me in this story is that, when Jonathan pushed Cindy, their children were at home. They saw this and seemingly saw their mom not wake up or get up from this fall, even running over to a neighbor's house. I cannot even imagine, being so young and even seeing that, the person that you love, both your parents get into what could be an argument, this push, your mom never wakes up. But how do you think that they being the children, their account of what happened helped possibly convict their own father?
Well, their testimony is going to be very critical in, first of all, the prosecution putting together the case for the grand jury to make the decision that they did to reinstate the murder charges. And then, of course, in terms of trial, their statement, because they are key eyewitnesses. They saw the interaction between the defendant and the victim. They saw the push, they saw the aftermath, and they're still living with the aftermath. So they are the most critical witnesses because they were present at the time that this homicide occurred. While it's traumatic for them, because again, them being involved in the criminal legal process, on top of the fact of, being basically the survivors of crime. They're the next of kin. They saw this horrible thing happen, and now they've lost effectively both of their parents because their mother sadly is no longer with us and their father is behind bars. And so they're going to have to navigate this world basically alone. And I just hope that their family members or other people that can really chip in and help them work through the trauma and possibly the guilt even of putting their father behind bars. Because again, one would be like, well, why would they feel guilty? Again, you're looking at their age and you're looking at the fact that now they almost had to make a choice between their parents. And so, it's very, very troubling and very traumatizing for a young mind to have to grapple with these types of issues.
Absolutely. Just being 7 years old and the other young child being just 4 years old. I just can't even imagine or fathom that. And the motive seemingly was the divorce or Cindy telling Jonathan that she wanted a divorce. Do you think that was the sole reason for the push?
I mean, it's hard to say, but many times when you see a relationship that's abusive in nature, it's very much about control and power. And if the abuser feels that they're losing control or power over their partner, they tend to lash out using violence. So it is possible that that was the basis, but also it could have been part and parcel of a broader series of abuse that he was just always abusing her on a regular basis. So whether she had said, I'm leaving you, or she said, the sky is blue, he may have reacted in the same way. So, clearly this is somebody with deep anger issues, deep resentment, and a very violent person. So, what exactly was the thing to trigger him, we'll never know. But we can pull from broader studies of intimate partner violence relationships, domestic violence relationships, that minute the partner decides to try to move away from the relationship, leave or escape, that's why we often say that when you get a restraining order or you try to leave the relationship, that's often the most dangerous time for someone who's involved in an intimate partner violence relationship. Doesn't mean don't leave. It just means you must have a plan and you have to have a safety plan and other people that can help support you to get out of this relationship.
And surprisingly, this week it seems like I've been doing a number of stories where, a partner kills their other partner in front of their children. Why do you think that abusers, or alleged abusers, in some cases, commit these violent acts right in front of young children? Is there any type of reasoning, or is it just because of, like you had mentioned, that control, that power, not wanting to lose, everything that they had wanted or worked for or whatever? Why do you think that there's been what it feels like so many cases where abusers are committing these acts of violence in front of young children?
Well, sadly, this is nothing new because abusers aren't one to be like, oh, wait, the kids are here. Let me take the argument to another room. They're about asserting their power and dominance in the entire household, which means the children are often afraid of the abuser as well because they see what the abuser has done to their family member, to their parent, and they're afraid the same thing would happen to them. Or the abuser may be abusing everyone in the household and harming the children as well as their partner. So this is again still part and parcel of that domestic violence type situation. And because of children witnessing this type of abuse, it results in children either growing up to become abusers or to end up in an abusive relationship. Because again, this is the model that they've witnessed, and this is their earliest understanding of how a relationship should work. And so again, there's just so many layers that makes this incredibly tragic and painful.
Definitely. Melba, I want to thank you so much for giving us your insight into this case. I really appreciate it. Before we sign you off, though, are you surprised that Jonathan Bates does still get that possibility of parole in his sentence?
That part surprised me. I thought he would have gotten life without parole because of the heinousness of the act, because of him fleeing, and because this happened in front of his children. But again, just because you have the opportunity for parole doesn't mean you're going to get parole. And so, usually, in order to succeed in the parole process, you have to have shown some manner of remorse. You have to have made good use of your time in incarceration, whether it's getting a degree or joining different groups in prison, getting mental health treatment or going to counseling, these types of things. And you also have to have a plan for moving forward and what you're going to do upon your release. Maybe in 20 years, he might be up for parole, 20, 25 years, whatever the case may be in Georgia. But if he does not show that remorse, if he does not show the parole board that he's ready to be released, he can end up spending the rest of his life behind bars.
All right. Again, Melba, thank you so much for your insight. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Although Jonathan Bates was given a life sentence, that sentence comes with the possibility of parole. At this time, it's unclear where he'll be serving out his sentence. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Millner.